Hi guys! I just want to show you what today's video is going to be about. It is a cute little snap top bag done all in the hoop except for these box corners, which really are optional, I guess. You don't have to make it boxed if you don't want. And it's all fully lined and closed seams. This is a little 5x7 version, and you can either do it with the arms or you can do it without the arms and legs and just have a little candy corn guy. So you have that option. You have a couple of different face options, and this is the 8x10 and this is the 6x10. Stay up. This is the 6x10 version, the one that we are going to do today. So you can see it's got the little cam snap on the top. It's lined inside. There's the bottom box. It actually fits quite a bit in it. You can see this size is the 6x10 and it fits my hand in it. And this one has the outline stitching in the zigzag, as well as there's the stitching with the satin, and there is a detail that goes around that. And you can use them for whatever you would like. Candies is what they were kind of meant for. However, one of my testers is using some of them for loot bags, I believe, and I thought this would kind of be, let's back this up a little bit. I thought this would kind of be a cute little gift for someone if you were to give them the little bag with some candies in it for a little one. And you've got stuff for carving, and then you could put some candies, you could put some makeup, and a little light for the pumpkin. Might make a nice little loot bag. Anyway, so today's project. Alright, to start the project, we need, if you're doing the little legs and arms that go with it, then you need a first hooping, and you need a tearaway stabilizer on that, and 2 pieces of material. I'm doing the one with the exposed seams on the outside, so you need a non-frame material. If you're going to do one that has the enclosed seams on the inside, and it is a little harder to turn because they're tiny little arms and legs. But if you want to do that one, the option is there for the larger version. You can use any material you want for that one. It doesn't have to be the non-fray. But for this version, I have 2 pieces of felt and the tearaway stabilizer. And for the main part of it, we're going to need the applique portion for the candy corn guy. I'm using also felt for his eyes. Then you need 2 pieces of batting. If you choose to use that, that actually is an optional step, but you still need to run the batting tack down, I think. And then you will also need 2 pieces of lining fabric, which is the green stuff I have, and you need 2 pieces of the main fabric. That is what you need, and we will get started. For the first part, to do the optional little legs and arms, you need to run the placement stitch, and then simply after that, all you do for the exposed version is you put a piece of felt on the top, and then you turn it over and you put an additional piece of felt or other non-fraying material on the bottom. And then you return that to the hoop and you run the stitches that will hold it all together. And now that the top stitching has been done to hold these 2 together, front, back, then the next thing to do is to cut them out. So that is a very, very quick, simple hooping. But it is not necessary to add the arms and legs if you don't want them to. It's just an option. Make them look a little cuter. So now these little guys are done, and we move on to the next step. Moving on to hoop number 2, or hoop 1 if you haven't done the little arms and legs. So the first thing that needs to be done is run the placement stitch on the stabilizer, and I like to use a light cutaway or a light tearaway for this, but it needs to be sturdy enough. If you use a regular tearaway with the embroidery, I find that tears a little bit easier when my stitches are going, so I like to use something a little bit sturdier, like the lightweight cutaway. And then you need to run the placement stitch on to the stabilizer, and you will notice that down here, you see that little line right there? Right here, that is a line that is basically just showing you the center. So if you have a material that you want to center on here, then you can use that line to do that. And the next thing that we have to do after the placement stitch is we need to add the batting. And again, this is an optional step if you don't want to add batting. I guess you don't need to. I find it helps the bag to stand up a little bit better. And this is a black fusible fleece. So on one side it has little fusible sticky dots, and on the other side it's kind of more like a felt. Now you could use a felt, you could use a light quilt batting. I just happen to like the fusible fleece because I can iron onto it once I have got this down, and then it will hold my other material into place. So the next thing is we need to take it back to the machine and run the tack down stitch. Now that the batting tack down is done, we need to cut out around it. Now, if you are doing the bag that has the notch in the bottom and that gets sewn separately on the outside, what you do for this portion is you cut out the notch. However, if you do not want the bag to be notched at the bottom and you're going to just leave it kind of at a rectangle bag, then what you can do at this point is don't cut out the notch, just cut out straight, well, straighter than that. You can just cut out straight there, and then you can just cut straight there, and then your bag will have the batting all the way down into the corner. However, I am going to do the notched version, so we're going to be cutting out all around. Now that the batting is all cut around, and you really need to cut close. I could probably do a little bit closer than that on some spots, but this design is meant to have it cut close. You can add your top main outside material for the front of the bag, and because I'm using kind of like a directional pattern, I do actually want to see where my center is, and then I can align that with that little mark that I have at the bottom. And if I want to be more accurate, I could draw that line up. But for this, I only want a rough guess that all of this pattern is kind of going to be on the straight side. And the outside tack down stitch is going to hold the material to the stabilizer so that it helps in applique, and it will also be used in the next hooping to line up the sides and the bottom, not the top, just the sides and the bottom. Okay, so the next thing is we need to go back to the machine and we need to run the tack down edge that goes around the whole thing. Now that the tack down is run, let's have a look. You can see it up there. And the next thing that we need to do is we will be running the placement stitches for the arms. So if you're using that, that is the next step. If you're not using that, just skip it. So here, I hope it's a bit easier to see. Oh, this one came out a little bit. So this is what the tack down for the arm is supposed to look like. It's this length. A little bit of that came out. So you take the arm that you want to use, and in my case, I'm using these little arms. These little arms are actually the 5x7 version, and I mean, you can use the one that is there for the 6. I just happen to like the little tinier arms. So I'm going to put it, and as you can see, you just slide it over just a little bit. You want it to cover just a little bit, and then you're going to be taping that down on both sides. So now that the arms have been done, the next thing will be to run the leg placement stitches. And the same thing as with the other placement stitch, you take the little legs and you figure out which side you want them on. I guess you could face toes in if you really wanted to, but it'd be kind of like a little cross foot like that. It'd be cute. I've designed it so that they kind of go this way, and you again line them up and put them just a little bit over and take them down. There we have it. The tack downs and the placements are all done for the feet and the legs. Now what you need to do is you need to take off the tape, and I like to use this regular tape, regular Scotch tape, because it really does easily peel off where the stitches are. That's why I use it when I'm placing it over this kind of stuff, and I don't mind stitching on this one as much because it's easy to get off. There we have it. The next step I find is easiest is to run the placement stitch for where the candy corn is going to be. And there we have the placement stitch for the little corn guy. And the next thing that we need to do is I am actually just going to go in and just cut those a little bit shorter and then place the top piece to cover up that. So the white. So what I have done is you can see I have just cut a little bit off of the excess on the inside, and I have put my felt down. And the next thing that needs to get done is to run the tack down to hold that one in place. So the tack down is done for that. Because it's a non-frame material, you can just clip out a little bit of excess in here. If you're using a fraying material with a satin border version, I wouldn't cut quite so close to this, but because this one doesn't fray, we can do that. And the next thing is to add the piece of orange, the center one. And what you do is you take that and you put it over top, and you need to cover what's there. So I cover right to the edge of where I have put the cut version. And then we need to run the stitch that is going to hold those two together. So now that I have done that, I'm again going to just cut a little bit off in there just to round it a little bit. Try and keep the seams inside, especially because felt's always a little bit more bulky. Just keep them down just a little bit, and it's bulk and it's felt, so it's not going to fray. And then the next thing that you have to do is you flip this down over to the center and either tape it in place or spray adhesive it, which is what I'm going to do here. And then after that, you run the tack down stitching to hold that together. I guess I just also need to note that the right side of the material is facing up for anybody that doesn't do applique all that often. And now we were going to add the yellow piece. So just cut that just a little bit. And the same thing with the little yellow man's body. We want to put it right side face down, run that stitch, flip it down, and do the same thing that we just did with the other one. When you're cutting, just be careful you don't cut the arms and the legs. So the little candy corn guy is now done, and the next thing that needs to be done is to run his inside details of his face and the outline. So when I'm doing the version that has the zigzag on it, I like to try and keep my edges cut a little bit straighter. If you're doing the version with the satin, it doesn't even really matter as long as you don't cut too close. You don't want to leave too much, but you also don't want to cut too close to the stitching, otherwise it may pull out. So let's go back and run the face and the outline design. So you can see the little zigzag outline is done, and now I just did the placement stitch and the applique portion for the eyes. I did miss a little bit right there. I don't particularly care. I think it should be okay. So I went and I did that. I cut the material around the eyes, and you do need to cut it close for this design because it's not that thick of an outline around the eyes. And now to move on to the rest of the face details. So the little guy is done, his little face. And the next thing that we have to do is the last step for this hoop is we put a piece of lining material and it goes over everything, and it needs to go past all the outside tack down stitches that are here. So you take a piece of lining material, and with the right side face down, and I do have SF101 and I have it on the main material as well. I use it for mostly everything I do. You put the lining piece of material down over, and it needs to cover over everything, and then you run the last stitch at the top that's going to hold these two pieces together, and this hoop will be done. So there we have that, and now we need to cut out this piece. Now that the hooping is complete, we can take it out, and this is the back of it. So now we need to take off the stabilizer. So you can see the back and the front, and we need to cut out the top part that goes straight across, up and around and straight. So you need to make sure that you clip the corners, and this corner here where it's straight into the curve, you need to make sure you give it a little clip into the corner without obviously cutting the stitches, so that that will lie nice. And then you can just take it and flip and push the rounded part out at the top. And then you need to make sure that this part that is going to be straight is actually straight. You don't want it left like this. You don't want it left down. You want to make sure that you take it and lift it up and get it nice and straight. That way it's going to catch in the stitching on the next hoop properly. And so you can iron it down into place a little bit there. And now it is pretty much almost done. What is important for this hooping is that you do not cut to the line. You need these lines. You need the bottom one, and you need the side ones to match up with the next hooping. You don't need the top one, it's enclosed. So you want to make sure that you don't cut too close to these. You can cut a little bit closer to the bottom, but you need to make sure that you have enough in the side so that when you're matching it up with the other hoop going face down, that you will have enough here, and you can kind of bend it and fold it, but then you want to have enough on the side to be able to tape down properly. So when I cut it, I don't cut it close. You want to make sure that you leave lots on the other one, on the lining piece, because that is what you are going to use to do your turning hole. So I have a little bit extra at the bottom here on the turning hole, where the turning hole will be. You don't want it cut close because then you won't be able to cut your to close your turning hole. Now this one is all done. Have a little bit of a closer look at them. You can see the sides are still there nicely intact with the stitches. We'll be able to line it up nice. And now we move on to the next hooping. So for the next hooping, we're going to do the same thing basically as we did on the first hooping. You're going to do the batting, and then you're going to cut out around the tack down. Then you're going to add the piece of main material, and then you're going to do the tack down around the outline of this. And once that is done, then we will be adding the piece from hoop 2 to this piece. All right, the tack down has been done. You can see this one, and it goes all the way around, just like the other one did. Now, the most important thing about attaching this piece to this hoop is that you put it, well, actually we should tape his little arms out of the way first so they don't get stuck. So what you need to do is you need to place it right sides together because this is the outside of the bag. And then what you need to do is you need to kind of look underneath the lining onto the underside of the main fabric where you see the tack down stitching, and you need to line those tack down stitchings up together on the outside of this bag and the outside of this bag. And the most important thing is to get these ones right at the bottom. They will not line up at the top. Let me just see here, just make sure I got that right. And then I like to add a piece of tape to the main material to make sure that that stays down and together before I put down the other one. And then you need to do the same thing. After the bottom one is lined up, you need to do the same thing with the sides. So let's just have a look here. You see how that side piece is there? So you need to line up the bottoms, and then you need to line up the side. So the easiest way to do that is move that lining piece out of the way, and then just make sure that your sides are lining up. And once they are lined up, you can tape this piece down into place. And see, that's why I said it's important to leave some space on the edge so that you can tape. And then if you go on to the other side, once you've done the first two sides, these sides should line up no problem. So now that that is all taped down, it needs to go back to the machine, and it's going to run a stitch along the bottom to close up the front where the turning hole is going to be. And I just want to show you the top where I said that the tack down line and the rounded curve are not going to match up. And that's okay, they're not supposed to. You don't want those close to each other, or you're going to be stitching this to the other part of the bag, and then your bag won't open. So again, it's just the sides and the bottom that match. So I've taken it to the machine, and I have run that last tack down stitch at the bottom there. See, it goes all the way across here. And the next thing that we need to do is you need to take, you don't want the top part to be caught in the stitching that goes along the sides. So you need to take it, and you either need to tape it up or tape it under. And you need to make sure that you keep it nice and straight along that edge. So you will see that that runs nice and straight along there. You don't want to bend these, you want those nice and straight. And the next stitch is going to be doing the final stitch to hold all the pieces together. So you put the last lining piece on with right side face down, which is right sides facing together on the lining. And I actually like to, because I'm using a bigger hoop than the stitching is going to be, I actually like to use pins, but I know the pins are not going to be in the stitching area. So this piece now will go back to the machine and is going to stitch around and is going to leave a turning hole at the bottom. And there we have it. The tack down to hold the two is complete. You can see the turning hole spot in the bottom. And now we need to go cut it out. And technically, you can leave the bag just like this. You don't need to do the box sides. If you want a flat kind of a bag, then don't feel the necessary need to box the sides. But I like that it can stand up on its own. The first thing that I like to do is I like to take the whole area where the turning hole will be and just cut on a little bit of a diagonal there. And this is why you need enough lining material sticking out so that you can have a nice turning hole. And then once the turning hole is done, you just turn it up and tape it out of the way, because you don't want that to be cut. And then you go around and you cut around the whole thing and leave about 1/4 of an inch or so. So the next thing is we can turn it, and it has 2 turnings. You turn it first to the inside, and then once done that, you will be turning it to the outside. I need to take these off to turn them. Now that it is turned, you need to make sure that you take the inside and you poke it out very nicely through with the turning. And you want to make sure that before you close up the bottom here, that you have your points turned out, and you want to make sure that you have your top portion here all nicely turned out and rounded. So now that your bag is turned to the inside and you've got the outside there, you can close the turning hole however which way it is that you like to close turning holes. I hand sew mine shut. I'm just not going to do that on film. Well, you just give it a nice little press, the inside. Now, if you want to box the corners, you need to stay on this side, because you need to box the corners on this side. You're going to be doing a stitch. However, if you want to be done and you just want your bag to look like that, I am going to give it a little turn so you can see. This would be the bag, flat, all finished. So if you want to just leave it like that and put a snap or 2 in the top, you can do that. Just hand it out that way if you want. But I like to box the bottom. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that this side seam and this bottom seam, when it's turned, you're going to want to make sure that those are lined up on the outside here. It is a little tricky, but you can feel the seam where the seam is. So using that is how I get that to line up, just with my fingers. And you can poke inside a little bit and have a look. Can't do it with those. All right, so what we need to do to get those boxed corners on the inside, and this would be after closing the turning hole, you would stand it up a little bit, kind of like that, and then you push down here with your fingers inside. You can push out to the side, And you need to find where the two seams are on the inside and line them up. So you can squish it out, kind of have a look on the inside if they're lining up. I know it's hard for you to see on the film, but I do have them pretty aligned here. This is where they line. So I'm going to keep a pinch on that. Make sure that they're still aligned, because that will make the outside look quite a bit nicer if those are aligned. And you pinch it down. I put a pin to hold it all together. And then you kind of do the same thing with, you will do the same thing with the other side. You will pinch it so that you've got the bottom and the side together. And the same thing inside. You need to find where the edges meet. And then you will make your little triangle. Put a little pin in it. So now you can see how the boxed corners are kind of going to be. And what you do is, for this size bag, this is the 6 by 10, and I like it to be about an inch up on the side seam. So this is the side seam, there's the bottom seam, and I take my ruler and I take it and I put about an inch up the side seam, and then I draw across of where it is that I'm going to be stitching. And then you take this to just a regular sewing machine and you stitch across it. So you do it to that side, and then you do it to this side, and then your corners are going to stand up. So I'm just going to go to the sewing machine and get that done. Alright, I went over and I sewed a straight stitch across, and just make sure you go back and forth at the beginning and at the end. And I used a friction pen, so when I iron on this, it will disappear with the ink. And now it is done. You just need to turn it. If you like doing bias binding, you could cut it off and do a bias binding. I don't find it's necessary for this bag, so I just give it an iron so that it stays up on the side. Give it a little bit of an iron on the bottom. And I have batting in here, so I don't feel it going through. And then when it's turned, it will just kind of sit up on the sides like this, and you will have your boxed bag. So let's turn that to the right side. All right, and here is why you want those seams, when you're feeling them inside, this is why you want them to match. So when you've turned it, they will line up on the outside. It's a little hard to see with this particular material, but you can kind of see where these seams match together right there. So you just push that out, and you do need to give it, or I guess I like to, I guess you don't need to, but I like to give it a nice little iron on the sides, give it a little press. Don't burn yourself. And then this cute little bag is done when it comes to the sewing part. And the only thing that would be left is to add the cam snap. You can see kind of on the inside how the lining I'm not sure. Let's see here. If I can get a better view, you can kind of see how those little tabs inside just lay up to the side so they're not in the way. And there we have it. We have our cute little boxed candy corn bag. I really hope that you guys give this one a shot too. It's easy. Make sure that you line the sides and the bottom so that this doesn't catch, and enjoy.